right here with me, Daniel Kalinaki. His titles keep changing all the time, so and every time they become a mouthful. So what I'm going to do is I'll ask him to say what he does, if that's relevant and important. But you all know Daniel Kalinaki. He is more famous for his column than the job he actually does. So I think we'll let him speak to it. And Charles Onyango Obo, also, who is more famous for his column Ear to the Ground, but he writes other things and he has other ways of describing himself. He has also a new role now. He is a podcaster. People know how to change. He will talk about that himself. My name is Robert Kaushinga. I am also many things, I guess. But for today, I will be hosting the conversation here about Uganda's political future now that we've seen how the dominant political party has managed its elections for officers and for flag bearers. It gives us a window into what the political future of the country looks like. And our job here today is to try and give you a sense of what that looks like. And there are no better people than the experienced two journalists who have had a, should I call it, front row seat, side court seat, ringside to every conceivable political contest since 1980. They have understood how these things have been, and somehow each history leads into the future. And then I am hoping to be joined by Proscovia Salam Musumba. I am trying to get hold of her. For some reason, her handle doesn't seem to connect, so I'm going to sort that out shortly. But for now, let me let my two guests introduce themselves, starting with you, Daniel. Daniel, what is your current title? If that matters.
I'm not sure that it does, but I like to think of myself as a poor man's freedom fighter.
Daniel, first of all, you're quite low. I don't know what's with your volume, but it's quite low.
So I'll try to speak louder. I don't know. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah.
Yes. My day job is to kind of try to cause as little, mischief as possible at the Nation Media Group editor in Uganda. Unfortunately, the other person you have speaking kind of set a wrong example. So we've been trying to just keep
You've been trying to correct his mistakes.
Correct historical mistakes.
Charles.
Thanks for having me, Robert.
Charles, Daniel is having a dig at you.
Daniel is the reason the saying with that with friends like this, you don't need enemies.
Just go on, Daniel. When I was editing the Monitor in the late 2008, just I don't know if I've told you this story. You had done a column in 2007 asking what should the Monitor live for and die for. I don't know if
yes.
So throughout the 5 years that I hands-on edited the paper, I had that column behind my desk, and it was a constant reminder that the job was really to keep the lights on and not try to get too clever.
Daniel, I don't know if you're using earphones or headphones or something, but the sound is still quite low, so you might want to just go to the speaker on your phone. That might just work better because it's not working. And this is the point at which I would like to inform you that the Honorable Proscovia Salam Musumba has sneaked in. Salam, how are you?
I'm great, my brother. Good to hear you.
How are the twins?
Bosoga has a double blessing. I tell you, it feels so nice that you
Charles,
catch up with lost
Yeah.
time.
has there ever been in the history of Uganda where a king of any of our communities has had twins, especially on first go? Eh? Who?
No, 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 no.
No, no,
Speaks
I
volumes
was
of
I
who
was
we are.
reading history. I think if I'm not wrong, I think King Kabakachua,
Oh,
you know, and this story is told in Mamdani's bombshell coming book, Slow Poison. I think he quotes the notes from, is it Taban Amin? Yeah, the guy in. So the guy wrote an incredible script, but for some reason he decided not to publish it. So he gave it to Mamdani, and there is an account of Amin's birth. And if I'm not wrong, I think it says that Amin's mother was a traditional healer, and then traditional medicine woman. But she, for some reason, had a fallout or something with Amin's father, and then he chased her. So she ends up in Uganda, and one of no, I think somewhere on Entebbe Road. No, somewhere in Kampala. So I think Chua, if I hope it is historical accurate that he was the king before Fred Mutesa, and he then wanted he heard of her prowess. So he goes and he sends his courtiers to bring her, and then he's able to help one of his wives to get, to have children, and in the process he's impressed by her talents, and he also has children with her, and actually Amin is said to be. So he built her a palace along Entebbe Road. Look, just leave it. We'll leave it there.
We'll leave it there. Before we get into the serious stuff, Charles, and I've never the word in Lusoga for a big man or a big person. Eh? There's no better word in the Bantu language. The Basoga have the best word. Eh? Do you know it? Daniel, you tell Charles.
Is this family friendly? Omubede. I think.
Omubede.
Omubede no yo. Real Mobede. But this one is more than Omubede. His Royal Highness is Mwenem.
There you go.
Yes.
You see, this Salamu is my friend, but she never taught me anything useful. Huh?
It's not too late, my dear Charles.
Okay, guys. So let's get started. So first of all, we need to get perspective, and for this, I will go to Daniel, the man who still sits in the newsroom, to get us to understand. Daniel, what is the election that has been going on in NRM and ended up in Kololo, and why is it a significant process?
Wow, a PhD submitted in fulfillment of what?
This is your favor.
So I don't know if you can hear me better now.
Yes, slightly, but we can live with this, yeah.
Okay, so I think there are many ways of seeing the process.
Because, Daniel, sorry, I want you to speak to this, assuming that there's someone listening in the Comoros who doesn't know or has no context of why we are even discussing an NRM election. Is it the same thing as the national election? Why is it significant?
Well, I think first and foremost, if someone is in Comoros and hasn't heard of the NRM, then they're probably 80 years old and dealing with dementia, because the NRM has been here for quite a long time now, 40 years.
Yeah.
So but it's, if you'd asked me that question kind of 2 years out, I think the ordinary argument would have been that the NRM as a political entity was on its deathbed. Having seen the party primaries across the country, I've kind of changed my perspective to acknowledge that the party is more deeply entrenched in the countryside than we let on, or than we realize. And I think that's partly due to the fusing of many of the social transfer projects, Enoga, PDM, which, there's no official requirement that you must be a member of the NRM, but by kind of default, if you are a very lazy opposition-leaning fellow, you might miss out on the piglets. So I think the NRM has entrenched itself in a manner that is going to make it very difficult, one, to dislodge it, but also it's very dependent on the centralized command at the top. That if the transition at the top is not handled well, it could as well implode very, very quickly, because the things that unite an NRM voter in Buyende voting for the LC1 are quite different from what unites the guys who were fighting for the Central Executive Committee roles. But I think it was a demonstration of itself as a mass party, a party that actually claims more members than there are eligible voters, which people kind of don't make sense of, but there's actually a very logical explanation for that, because one of the things that the NRM has learned to do is to recruit them early. So there's this very intentional effort to get school kids kind of signed up from A-level, and I think sometimes even stretching further down into the O-levels. So you will have people who might have become of age, they're not registered as voters, but they see themselves as part of the NRM. So I thought it's kind of given a bit of pause for thought, and I think there's an outfit that was trying to go its own, that I would be very surprised if, as it appears to be apparent, the strategy is not then to try and run itself into the NRM and kind of take control of the party from inside.
We shall return to that. But the thing that I also wanted you to just clarify is, what are the elections that took place? Because there at one point there were people lining up in the village, and I remember the enduring memory in my mind was the photo of one of the former luminaries of NRM standing alone behind his poster. That's Crispus Chionga, and I think he had lost out at some village election. Just sort of quickly take us through how many election processes were there and what were the members voting for?
I'm not sure one can count them, but what essentially was the primaries went all the way to the lowest rungs of the party. It's both a renewal process, so you kind of test the membership, the integrity of the membership. So the primaries were from the lowest possible elections that we're going to have, into interest groups, all the way up into the local councils, 3, then the district chairpersons, then up to members of parliament, and then the special interest groups, and then into the top organ of the party, which is the Central Executive Committee. To the point of the lining up, this was a throwback to I think the elections in the late 90s, which at the time were brutally democratic, and I think there's still a certain hangover for that kind of brutal demonstration of whether you are popular or not. And I think it's kind of an interesting thing to bring back, in the world of AI and in the world of blockchain, and there are very many ways you can organize voting and counting of votes that do not involve people standing in the sun. But I think there's a logic to it. There's one, the sense that it allows the party to to paint the country yellow, and it kind of plays to the democratic credentials, in the sense that you're either beaten or you won, while also being distinctly undemocratic. Because if it's human nature to try and go with the winners. So if I'm running with you, and you get your people out quickly, and your queue is much faster than mine does, then people who are probably going to cross over to your queue just because they don't want to be behind a single guy on the other side. But because of then the corruption that had already been seen in the elections, you would imagine that some of the candidates maybe preferred to see who had eaten their money and not voted for them. Probably explains the violence that we also saw in the process.
Talking about that, Salam, you're a politician and
Yes.
you are in active politics. And for now, I will ask you to abandon your colors or whatever hat you're wearing and just ask you this question. Why was this primary? I mean, Daniel has sort of touched it, but why did it become such a matter of life and death? Literally. I mean, in some places, the people were exchanging gunfire. And even at Kololo, there was a fist fight and anti-riot police had to intervene and bring back order at the delegates' conference of the ruling party.
Well, to me, it's a desperate, it's a desperate effort to hang on to opportunity, limited opportunities as it has happened over the years. And so it became desperate because the rest of the country has run out of opportunity, political opportunity, economic opportunity, social opportunity. Everybody's hanging on the thread of making it within politics in the NRM. So when you hear that the economy is growing, there's peace everywhere, everything is working, this kind of desperate political engagement speaks to the fact that there are shrinking opportunities everywhere. And so everybody is desperately wanting to get in to buy space for the next 5 years. It's desperate because nothing else is working anywhere, not in any ministry, not in any parastatal, not in any local government. The crime scene is only parliament and the executive. And it's not for the normal politics as we know it, providing a voice, providing choice. It is desperate for people to survive and to be able to live a decent life. All other opportunities have been closed. But it also speaks to the greater question of our political history. We've been here before, haven't we?
Have we?
We have.
Tell us.
Well, in our history, you know that the inevitable end of a political system, of a political party, these are the early warning signs. UPC, for instance, we have been told in our history that what you saw play out in Kololo is exactly what played out in Gulu.
When in Gulu?
When UPC was changing its Secretary General Kakonge and Ibingira. And it's like the same template. And so, to my mind, I see that as a sign, as a winning sign of not majority, a happy majority, but a desperate majority. And that desperate majority really cannot think, cannot act, cannot plan. It's literally stampeding on itself. And the loss of the central nervous system. Because why would a chairman of a party wait for the play out as you saw it between the two ladies and to all other senior members of the party? How would anybody let it happen except when they are not properly in charge of the situation as is? And so that has infected the political environment largely. And being, like the Americans say, too big to fail, with all its implications. What Kalinachi has spoken about it being entrenched. It's not entrenched because it's the best system. It's because it has chosen that as a method of work to keep a slave mindset onto the majority of Ugandans in the countryside. Because then it's a lifeline, that PDM is a lifeline. That's the parish development model. Emioga, these are all efforts of government policy taking resources back to the countryside. And it hasn't succeeded. And so this desperation of the elite class, because they're the ones stampeding on the countryside, they must begin there in order to make it through the different structures to get to the top. If they could harvest leadership from the top, the bottom would have been without these problems. But because everybody must get their rooting, their political rooting from the grassroots, that's why they stir up the water for them to be able to swim up till to the top. So,
Go on.
My biggest concern is that it's a replay of the UPC politics, which got us into this mess in the first place. And that we have not taken lessons, and we need to juxtapose these two scenarios, Gulu and Kololo. And for Kololo as the independent ceremonial grounds, surely speaks volumes of how far off we are from independence and the dreams of independence that our parents had.
Let me come to you, Charles. Both Salam, in different ways, both Salam and Daniel raise one important point, that NRM currently is the only viable vehicle for opportunity and social mobility. And that's why everybody has made that calculation, and therefore that's why the race or the electoral process in there becomes a matter of life and death, both literally and figuratively. What do you see, and are the comparisons, and is it both entrenched and vulnerable, as Daniel says, or is it just the sign of the end, as Salam is talking about? What is your own reading of what happened in Kololo and across the country? In fact, you told me something about LCs in a village in Tororo drawing knives. Maybe we start from there. What was that story, Charles?
No, but it's it's just what these guys. But really, there are two things which I see to have happened because, as from a structural point of view, as a process, at the bottom, the NRM is kind of really a different party from the party at the top. At the bottom, it has become a self-organizing party and more democratic. But at the top, it is where it's led and structured and more authoritarian. It's very democratic at the bottom. So they are now. If this question of opportunity actually speaks to something, I've been doing some research and work on this. First of all, the NRM. I mean, it's a very interesting party that the NRM in the West, the NRM in Uganda, and in the East really is. They're also becoming different parties. They have a different, tendencies. But let me give you an example. I know situations, particularly in Eastern Uganda, where the people, for example, at the last election, you have an election official who would rig an election for 70, and then go and try and rig it for an FDC guy. So
at the local level.
Yes, at the local level. So there is the NRM at the lower tends to be a much more bipolar and actually a sophisticated party. So so you at the primary, you had there were very interesting shifting allegiances. A lot of the people who were in the party were not dyed in the wool NRM people. Because one of the things that NRM has done, and I make this an argument I've written for, an article I've written for Daniel's paper, which is coming out, I think, tomorrow or something. It's that the NRM has expanded by co-option. It hasn't. It has expanded less by organic recruitment of similar members.
Ideological.
Yeah. So now what has happened? If you then and so that process then at the top, you run into a situation where the leadership wanted a much more controlled process and outcome, which was primarily at odds with the more democratic process that had happened at the grassroots and created at the party. Now, I don't even think so. Salam is correct, but I don't even think at the lower parts of the party that the NRM, just for example, allocates that if you're a local NRM official, you are likely to benefit more than others because of this character of this party. I think at that level, it tends to be a much more democratic gravy train. Everyone gets, irrespective of their political affiliation, takes a cut, so that the argument of whether it is the only way you get to it, I think we need to nuance it a little bit, more.
But you could also argue, Charles, and I want to follow that argument of yours, that it's, as you say, self-organizing, but it also means that everybody is leveraging it at their level for their own advantage rather than for building institutional capacity. So
precisely.
So if I am a powerful man at my farm at Rujeyo, I then look for a vehicle with which to legitimize my position that I have established purely either by organizing, and then I just wear these colors and then trade them in when I need some sort of advantage at the center.
Yeah.
So I want to throw a spanner in the works, and I want to go back to what two things that both Daniel and Salam have raised, and I'll just put it to the three of you to have your take. So Daniel made the argument earlier on that, in a sense, the process that NRM has taken itself through was a process of renewal and entrenchment, but also vulnerability. And I repeat what Salam has said, that it is the only game in town. It's the only vehicle. Now, one of the things that was very apparent has been the emergence of completely new faces in the play. And let me start by saying that there was a time when, I think from around 2015 or thereabouts, nobody really cared for the Central Executive Committee of NRM. In fact, the only game in town was the Parliamentary Caucus of NRM, and it functioned as if it was the Politburo of the party. Suddenly, the Central Executive Committee has become so important, and I would dare say that one of the most consequential outcomes of this election is to thrust the Right Honorable Speaker, Anita Among, into perhaps the most pivotal political position today in the country. And in fact, for me, I am even betting that right now she's the front runner to succeed the leadership of the NRM party. Because clearly she's demonstrated as the most effective organizer, the person with the resources. She has shown effective control of parliament, has shown just sheer political force and calculus within the party. I hear that she has a very strong hand in the judiciary. So I think that it thrusts her and I think her allies into an interesting position. Daniel, let me throw it into your lap right now. Who are the winners and who are the losers? And you spoke sort of vaguely about an outfit. So now this is your chance to talk about the issues.
So Robert, first and foremost, I think the old adage in politics rings true that it's very dangerous to be, you're going into, I think it's from the Roman Catholic Church, that if you go into the conclave as a pope, you come out as a cardinal. And this has nothing to do with the visit to the papacy that we've seen. So my own sense is that obviously, and I think before we come to the individuals, I think to the point that I think Charles was saying, the NRM has a very interesting dichotomy, whereby it's pretty democratic at the grassroots, and then suffers a severe lack of democratic oxygen at the top. So, and I think this is a manifestation, in my view, of the classic dichotomy between the electors and the selectors, that you have, the semblance of competition, the semblance of, anyone can come in and, run for instance, member of parliament. And this is borne out in the high churn rate that we see in parliament, in about 60-65% of the incumbents.
70 actually.
It's actually inched up, never come back. Yet at the top of the party, I think, after the events of 20, running up to 2016, there's then been almost a ring fencing of certain key positions. So you have an expansion of the electors, which give a sense that it's you can get in. The NRM sets itself as a big tent where anyone can come in. And I think that spoke to, the discussion about the historicals and the newcomers in the party. But if you then look at the real power play, and the selectors, then that is very carefully orchestrated in terms of who comes in, and then that ensures that there's a symbiotic relationship where the people in that organ or the senior organs don't have an independent power base of their own, so they're dependent on the nod from the top, and then in exchange that they then do the bidding of kind of where the real power lies. So I think that dichotomy of democratic at the bottom and undemocratic at the top, I think, is what makes the NRM inherently unstable, because you don't have the positions at the top are quite limited, so you can't have renewal of leadership or of cadreship that rises all through the ranks to the top. And when it has gone out to co-opt new political players and expand its political elite, those who already had standing in the opposition, for instance, cannot begin at the bottom. So they have to come in fairly senior roles, and that's how you end up with a situation whereby many of the current leading lights in the party are actually people who have actively campaigned against the party or been very critical of the party. In terms of the individuals, I think it's too early to tell. There's definitely momentum with with the speaker kind of winning that battle, that bruising battle against the former speaker, and it was beyond just the win. There was a sense of both inevitability and arrival. That a new force had arrived. I was surprised.
Yeah.
I was surprised, heading down southwest, around the time of the contest, and seeing billboards for the speaker all the way in, Mbara, all the way I think towards Kabale. So you could clearly see that she'd become establishment, and the former speaker was the outsider. Within, if you're next to the heartbeat, you always have a fighting chance. What would really look interesting is what happens in the event that there is no anchor beyond the power players. If just for scenarios thinking, if there was a dispute as we had between the speaker and the former speaker, and Alhaji Chigongo, who's kind of long-term vice chair of the party, was the one that had to adjudicate between the two parties, would he have the same gravitas and the same ability to kind of manage that dispute? I'm not sure. And therefore, I think what you see now is not what it might look like if there is a change in personnel higher up in the party.
Salam, I muted you, so you'd have to unmute yourself and come back in. Good. Now, Salam, Daniel raises an important point that, yes, the dichotomy that Charles talked about, where at the grassroots you have what appears to be a very democratic process. Then when it gets to the top, it either becomes transactional or authoritarian. And could that explain the violent reaction of a lot of the delegates about the manner in which Odoi blatantly and in full view of the cameras just simply, I don't know how you know how to describe that. It can't be miscounted. He deliberately added votes and just got away with it, and nothing has happened to him. And then against allegations that actually the delegates there were people who were not delegates, and the tempers. So is that where the contradiction managed to express itself?
No. There's no contradiction. There's no self-organizing at the lower level. There's none. There's none whatsoever. What you see that at the top is exactly what happens at the bottom.
What do you
There's
mean?
no way where you can describe the lower government level NRM elections as being self-organizing and being democratic in any way. They're not. What you have at the lower levels in the villages are cartels,
What do you mean?
NRM cartels,
And what
where
do they look like, and how do they operate? If they are
they
cartel.
they op- they operate in the dark. Information moves in a format of intelligence, because this entire operation is carried out not by the NRM's registrars at the district. They are assisted by the local security people, village ISO operators, internal security organization, sub county, and they just make sure that the people they would want at the top or to sustain the organization is meticulously selected at the bottom. And so it is a security operation right from the grassroots. Who is eligible, who they want to front, who they are supporting, who they must fight. And that's why you see the fights start as early as the village election. I know from looking around the villages I was able to look at in Kamili district that it is the business of the internal security operatives. This time they were assisted by the PLU team that would want to see an internal overthrow of the established NRM cadreship growth and overrun the party. And so it's not an innocent build-up to what you saw at the top. It's all inbuilt. It's an inbuilt, coherent system of manipulation, of scheming, of plotting. That's why at the top it's a do or die, because they have invested money right from the grassroots. So coming to the Central Executive Committee, of course, that's the highest organ of the party. Central Executive Committee is the power center. And the guys that invested money in it have the appetite to overthrow, to overrun the party, to
What do you mean?
overrun what do I mean?
Yes, and who are these?
Well, you saw, for instance, that the female national person, it becomes so heated because of creating a new power center, what they called a generational shift, which in my view became a weapon to consolidate the weaponry of power.
You're speaking in tongues, Salam. You go. You speak as my friends keep telling me. You speak with your chest out. Yeah, say
You
it.
see, you
Yeah.
see, the system preferred Speaker Anita Among to their own Rebecca Alitwala Kadaga because of the task ahead, the transition and the succession plans that are being moved together. And therefore, Alitwala Kadaga looked an obstruction to the speed and the impunity with which they want to do it. And so their weapon of choice was one acclaimed former opposition who has delivered, who has disorganized the opposition, who has used her knowledge of the opposition party to systematically blow them up, cause anarchy within them, and celebrate that. And so she has the appetite to overrun NRM too. She has the appetite to conquer NRM. And so she has been allowed a free space to graze and raise them to the end and build a political class around her to enable her achieve that for the NRM chairman. Because it's the only NRM chairman and his deputy that have held on to the positions they have for this long. And therefore, they are the constants. So, it's still a building story. But from my knowledge of her and her work methods and her style and her determination, I can safely say that she will leave nothing to
So
chance.
let me turn to Charles, because basically, Charles, what both myself and Salam are saying is that actually up until this point, we all may have underestimated the capacity of Anita Among, and that actually she is probably a much more effective and shrewd operator, and that if she's been as destructive or as effective, let's put it that way, in her work against the opposition as Salam has described, what's to stop her from deploying those methods and dismantling whatever is left of NRM and taking it over?
Because it takes more.
That
It takes
laugh.
more than that. Right? No, because it takes
It's
more
like
than
an
that.
Afro whiz.
Because it takes more than that. Because to take over the NRM, you'll have to have a national structure. And in fact, as Salam herself said, when you actually now, as we can debate the details of it. When you have a party in which the intelligence operatives and shadowy cabals are the ones deciding leadership, it actually tells you that the party has been hollowed out. So the question is, where are the centers of power? And I think that to organize at to take power at the national level, they are, Anita Mong doesn't yet have the capacity, although she has proved herself to be a very, very competent operative. And I think that a lot of people have sat up and noticed that, they need to take her very seriously. So you begin to think that you see that I see someone like Salim Saleh, for example, that he has a much, much greater network, national network, and the ability to shape the leadership in the future. But you must give her credit. Considering that she's not very popular with First Lady Janet Museveni, who apparently didn't want her to win, and yet she was still able to get a really remarkable, is it 92% of the vote? That I think is, and then secondly, because Museveni, behind the scenes tilted the vote in her favor, he is not suicidal. He wouldn't enable his own fall in this way, because he is probably, one of the clearly, much more shrewd and wily than her in terms of these operations.
What if he has misread her?
No, because it goes to the question, and Salam touched on it, because where is her source of power? Okay, she's clearly a very asymmetrical thinker. A lot of people just thought she was a simple peasant's daughter or whatever from Bukede, but now she has shown that she's not. But where is her source of power? Her source of power is money, which essentially Museveni enabled it. She wouldn't have, because and why is the money important? Because it has been the primary means of her purchase of parliament and a large section of the of the opposition. So that is a vulnerability, because assume, Robert, that Museveni shuts off the taps. Within 4 years, she won't have the capital to run the kind of very transactional politics that has given her power. So that is the primary limitation in that model.
So I want to ask you, Daniel, do you see her suffering the same fate as Rebecca Kadaga? Because I want to draw parallels. If we go back historically, that the people who have been the spearhead of removing others end up suffering exactly the same fate. So do you see her, as Charles has said, if the boss decides that, okay, this is as far as you're going, do you see that happening? I mean, we saw Wapa being removed as speaker after he'd done a great job as CA, and then he was sent off to go and cool off in a nondescript little office called National Political Commissar, and then then EK followed. I mean, we can name quite a few. What do you think?
So I think, and I agree with Charles about how I think people make the mistake people mostly make in politics is to underestimate their rivals. I think you're better off overestimating them. And the one thing that she still has, because she's been relatively short-ordered within the party, is that she seems to have read the nature of politics, and the fact that you must not only be loyal, but you must also be subservient. So
what's the difference?
The difference is that if you're loyal, you will say yes, sir. If you're subservient, you will say yes, sir, and you're probably on your knees and you're saying, "Can I also bring a glass of water?" Would you like some? Would you like some? A slice of lemon in that. So she and this is it's a very interesting thing, because over the years, the list, the character list has changed, but the play has been the same. People who emerge, they somehow think that they are smarter than Museveni, or that they're smarter than the guy who was there before, and then allow the power to get to their heads, and then they start thinking that they're either equals or equal partners, or co-investors or shareholders in the project. The big salary of a CEO does not make them a shareholder. There's a huge difference between a shareholder and a CEO, and then they make the mistake of either beginning to kind of create their own power centers. That was, I think, Vice President Bukenya's problem, going around with his upland rice. Or then they are led to believe that they actually are in the succession, and that they have carte blanche to actually mobilize and create their own structures. I think that was the fate of former Prime Minister Japan. Thus far, she has demonstrated the humility to say yes, sir, and to work very hard for her packs. And to kind of know her space and her place in the pecking order, I think. And she's very, I think the word Charles used was asymmetrical. She's very clever. I think she knows which buttons to press. Naming hospital wards after members of the first family, I don't think that's written in any book in politics anywhere. So there's a sense in which her skills, and her skills have been on demonstration for a few years now in Parliament, are very clear. But you never know her next step. You never know what she's. So she has the unique. In fact, I would like to think that among the political actors, I think she comes closest to President Museveni in terms of, being able to remain one or two steps ahead of the other person, while also being very transactional. So, if she will trade places, she will trade things, to get ahead. What is not clear, therefore, is whether that power gets to her head at a certain point. Apropos your, nominating her as the heir apparent politically, but also where the selectors are going to be and what they're going to be looking for. Does she go into an election, for instance, as the NRM party candidate, in which case, if the selectors in the NRM have decided that they want, a civilian female candidate, then she has a very good chance at that slot. If, on the other hand, the considerations are different, then the path to power is not that clear. She obviously has to manage a few other residual power centers. I think the listening post in Parliament is not to be discounted. It has its own constituencies. The way the new formations look like, I think is also going to have a bearing. But most importantly is whether that play for the role is happening in Museveni's presence or in Museveni's absence, because Museveni's absence then sparks its own set of dynamics that will probably bring a few more interested parties into play, and at which case then it's a bit harder to call from 5, 6, 7, maybe even 2 years out.
Okay, so this then takes me back to Charles, because the point I want to raise is that if you're going to do anything in the politics of today, you have to have a political coalition. And Charles, you referred to General Saleh as the one other person who has an extensive and established network. The question, though, is it a political coalition or just a network of very effective people, but they're not an organization? So, but that raises a completely different issue from what Daniel is saying. And Daniel has introduced a new factor, that any discussion about succession must take into account whether that will happen in Museveni's lifetime or after. Now, there are clearly, in my look, two power centers. So you've got Anita's process, which has come in through the manner in which it has come through the party. But you've also got the Patriotic League of Uganda, whose chairperson is the CDF, General Muhoozi, who, whether you like it or not, is a very powerful and will probably be the most powerful individual by virtue of the office he occupies. Because, as we all know, the law has changed, and so the CDF has greater command, probably, than even the commander-in-chief. So, as Daniel says, if the consensus is you get a civilian woman as the successor and you follow in the footsteps of CCM, you still need a very powerful individual. So whether General MK becomes president or not, in such an arrangement, he ends up as the most powerful individual in the setup. That's the way that I see things. Do you see it my way? And how do you see the process of transition happening, both in the boss's lifetime or after? Charles, you're muted. Yeah, okay, go on.
There is an element of this, which is like pagans dancing around a stone. In other words,
Stonehenge.
That it doesn't really make a difference, and in many ways, I'm interested in Daniel's suggestions that there are so many outlier elements, because one thing, there are two things you speak of transition, there is actually no transition process in Uganda because transition is a much more sophisticated and deeper process and involves structural change and also personnel. So, I mean, you can move from a military dictatorship to a multi-party system, blah, blah, We are not, what is most likely happening in Uganda, or what I think is happening is a succession. Now,
what's the difference?
Okay. A succession is the kind of thing that happen in CCM. Huh? The people, change, but the clothes remain the same. Huh? and then the second thing about succession, that's why I say there's an element of this which is like dancing around, pagans dancing around a stone, because it always happens when the patriarch has died. It never happens when he's alive. And
the succession never happens.
No, rarely. So Queen Elizabeth dies and Charles becomes what? And so if you look at all the times when people like Mohozi, the president's children, have been in contention or have become president, take Togo, when Yadima, and Nasimba. How did Faure become president? After his father died. And then, of course, the party and the military put him
Chad.
in. Chad, same thing. Gabon, the same thing. There is not a single case where this kind of transition, which, for example, say Museveni is kind of trying to position his son, which has happened when the patriarch is alive. And so it becomes, because of that, it is also very uncertain. So the question then becomes, look at the situation when the patriarch in Uganda departs. It will be chaos, Bob. A lot of these assumptions, there might not even be the powers that be to assemble, to call people. Half the people will be running for the tall grass, and everyone will be. I mean, it will be very, very chaotic. And why will it be chaotic? Because unlike many of these other places, Museveni has hollowed out the party. So Salam Musumba is correct that the most dangerous thing you can do when you are playing now in succession politics is to hollow out the party, and in many ways to hollow out the military, because the Ugandan politics, at least at the top, it's like a family inheritance. It has become like ancestral land. Kalinaki's father dies, so he can take over the old man's land. He's appointed the heir, and then he distributes the land. So now, with that kind of thing, you don't hollow out your party if you want success. So that introduces so many uncertainties in the times ahead.
Salam, is Charles being alarmist?
No. Charles has seen this before. And so he knows a thing or two about collapsing institutions, especially the politics we've lived with as a generation.
Yeah.
We have not been lucky, and we have not organized sufficiently to rein in all these risks, these fallouts. And so each of us is looking at a repeat of what everybody fears. I'm sure what Charles has done is to do for us inadvertently a risk analysis of the situation we are in and the situation where we are headed to. Of course, this is worse because I've just seen another tweet about Rohingya in 2066. So the entire lineup of father, son, grandchild, and great grandchild, that the dynasty has been rumored for years, is all set to roll. But you see, the dangerous part is that there's a society that is hell bent to stop it with bare hands. And so these two forces meeting in the middle, the clash, the missing moment is time. When will this happen? But as to whether it will happen, it is inevitable now. So what we are painting for ourselves, and we are doing this for ourselves, not even for the listenership out there, but for ourselves, it's really an early warning and a plea that are we able to reverse this? Unfortunately, the skill set to do that doesn't seem and the constitutional and legal administrative guarantees to stop it are not there. You should have been at Garuga's burial, where Amanya Mshega was literally crying out to the public to save themselves, and admission that they have failed. Their generation that brought this has failed, and they're wearing out. And they're as desperate as the people they're speaking to. So I kept wondering to myself, who will bail the cat? And having missed all the opportunities of doing so, is it possible now? So yes, I think what we are left with now is really lamentations and really pleading to ourselves whether we can find. Of course, we can. We are able to see the dangers, the lack of order, even within the first family, because when you hear them quarreling with the brother-in-law and the family feud, which we get treated to at times, it is very scary.
So,
Robert, if I may, I take a a bit of a detached view to some. So to the point of transition and succession, I think there's actually been some transitionary arrangements. If you look, for instance, at the civil service, I think a lot of the traditional civil service has been gutted out and has been gutted and replaced with cadres. I think the police, the traditional kind of police kind of hierarchy was removed and has been replaced by a new cadre that would not have existed maybe 20, 30 years ago. The judiciary, I think we're seeing a very active appointment of judges that probably are not just being picked for their knowledge of the law. But I think the place where the transition has happened more intentionally has been in the military, where the historicals, so first the ancient fighters from UNLA and the co-opted people have all been kind of retired. There's just a handful left. The ones from the NRA as well have been pretty much retired. And you now have an army that looks different at the level of the personnel and the command, with certain kind of links between those in command. But the structure of command has also shifted. The power play in the military has shifted, where the CDF has a lot more power, historically, has so much power that one would have the option of saying whether they actually want to become commander-in-chief and president, whether they would prefer to remain the CDF and manage kind of affairs of state at that level. I think what we're then also seeing is a political transition, as messy as that can be, where the historicals in the NRA, NRM are also being phased out of the political structures of the party and of government. And I think one of the things that Museveni has benefited from his longevity is that he's been able to stay in place long enough to kind of outlast all the people that could have, offered a political rivalry to him on account of their historical contribution, while now allowing for a new political elite to kind of emerge within the party. So I think, if we think of succession in the narrow terms of, getting a new president, then, that's kind of up for grabs. You can look at the different scenarios. I don't know what will happen. I hope it's not that dramatic, but, that's really more out of hope than expectation. But in terms of bringing a new political elite into play, a new military elite into play, a new technocratic elite into play, I think it's been happening right beneath our feet over the past 20 or so years. And I think there's been some kind of, it may not be the succession that we expect in terms of policy direction, in terms of new power structures, but in terms of the new power centers, I think there's definitely been the emergence of new ones.
And which again makes me pose this question, and you can all take it on, that the elite or the ones that are being replaced either professed or had some kind of cosmetic expression or allegiance to some kind of ideology. Now, can the same be said about the emerging elite that you've talked about in all sorts of places? Can they be said to be serving a higher purpose of liberation, of transformation, especially that they've emerged as part of a process of transactional politics rather than struggle? I mean, that's the question that for me becomes very important, because then will they necessarily act or try and have a new contract with the population, or will it be a game of self-preservation, and therefore we could end up with too many elites and too few positions, and the end times, as there's a book writer I'm even trying to look on my shelves for the author of the book. Somebody was talked about the end times. I'll get the name. Who wants to take that on?
Robert, I'll just go first because mine is pretty short. I think your answer is to be found in the campaign speeches for the, between Speaker Mong and former Speaker Kadaga, and the fact by extension that you hardly hear of any NRM official talking about party ideology and speaking in the manner that the president speaks, in terms of Pan-Africanism, the 10-point program, regional markets. He speaks to himself, he speaks to an audience that has long shifted, right? So and if you emerge today and said you're running on the basis of, your ideological clarity and your, understanding of dialectical materialism, no one is going to pay attention to you, because it's become very transactional, and it's become how much you can pay and what constituencies you can bring. So the big church is about sheltering from the rain. It's not about trying to worship some kind of political god.
Hey, Charles and Salam, the most interesting thing leading on from that was the letter that the president then wrote subsequent to the Kololo elections. And the most interesting thing about that letter is the only issue he chose to address at length, out of all the contradictions in Kololo, was the issue of a man called Karangwa and the problems of sectarianism in Uganda. And then he went right back to the 60s about the sectarianism and the politics of the 60s. And then now Salam is telling us that actually there's no difference between what happened in Kololo and what happened in Gulu. So were the contradictions lost on him, or are we just, right? I mean, because one would have expected that he would have addressed things like the grievances of those who felt that the election process was rigged, the violence at Kololo, the logistical problems that may have affected the outcome. There were some very senior officials who complained about the use of huge amounts of money. All those issues have not been addressed. But we went to talk about a small, well, maybe not small, but a tribal issue in a smaller part of the
But
NRM constituency. Go ahead, Salam.
you seem to have lost President Museveni and Chairman Museveni in his
How?
style of leadership. He's creating a new narrative. He's creating a new narrative, and he wants to set the agenda. And so when he gets to Karangwa, and that letter, it's really communicating to Uganda that Uganda, you have no right to go back to ethnic politics. And while at the same time, he is fixing the politics of Beiru in the Greater Ankole through Basajja Balaba and the Entrepreneurship League. Because
How
there's
do you mean?
no, listen, in the NRM constitution, there's no place where you negotiate your way to the top. And that you find Deputy Speaker Thomas Tayebwa in a venue that is not gazetted, comes back with an announcement that Caesar Mlenga and Basajja Balaba have reached an agreement. How did they reach an agreement? It should have been the Electoral Commission that was making that announcement. The backstage negotiations is to cover the subterranean concerns that, listen, we have put our stake, and I represent a group of people. Of course, that they don't say on the table. But if you read things from where I read them, you will see that that was a big Beiru trophy. And so how can he come then to Baganda and say, listen, you don't have, you cannot be speaking about ethnicity at this point. So there's more than you're reading. The underbelly of what was going on with the invisible hand, which was quite visible, is that the undertones and the overtones of Kololo are really lost only to the elites. They are so raw to the observers of politics from where we stand as political parties, but also where we stand as not elites, because the elites have chosen to miss the wand, the magic wand, and what it's doing to our body politics. And they want to normalize situations that are at the heart of what the struggle for transition and the struggle for succession is about. It's about who we are and what is our stake in this country.
Charles.
So
Yeah, go on, sorry, Salam. Finish.
please, we need some raw discussion of these things to help us unpack, what is being unsaid. Because
Charles.
what is being unsaid is more important than what we are saying.
Charles, what I mean,
You know, they are. Why does Museveni sometimes dwell, or why did he dwell on the past? You know, in many ways, he's like the guy whose girlfriend has walked out on him, and you stand on the doorway to wave her goodbye. I think he knows. He knows. he understands what has happened here. So I mean, that
So
old
what has
NRM
happened?
of his, it has worked out on him, and I think that he will he will spend a lot of time, in this grievance mode, and it expresses itself into doubling down on the history. So what has happened? One of the things that has happened, and in fact, actually, I think it is good that money has come into NRM the way it is, because it has in a strange sort of way introduced democracy. Because here, Bob, the thing is, it was incredible seeing the people in Colorado. They were very vexed over money.
Yeah.
Because money is the one thing that Museveni cannot tell people to shut up about when they're asking. So it was not ideology, but really to see dissent over issues of money. People hadn't got money, the role of money. So it has really been a very strange thing that the cat dragged in, and it created this. Then the third thing and again, people will read this in the Mamdani book, and in the conversations he had with Mamdani in Dar es Salaam of Uganda. I think two things happened to Museveni. 1972, when together with those guys and the Fronasa guys, they came and attacked Mbarara. You see, the calculation at that point that there would be kind of a spontaneous uprising in the Ankole region, and and that would fuel, his campaign. But there was nothing; it didn't happen. And in 1980, he stands for an election in Nyabshozi, and he loses his deposit. He comes in third. I think that Museveni was in many ways traumatized by that, and a lot of his politics is a little bit like post-traumatic, stress syndrome over those
Stress
things.
disorder.
Yeah, and yes, and then
stress disorder. Yes.
yeah, and then, but what happened? Where does he get vindication? He gets vindication in Uganda. The thing that Ankole would have given him in 1972, Buganda gave to him in 1981. And that therefore, when he sees this drift away, it is really in a legacy term and I think, in a way in which he validates himself. It is an extreme crisis of identity, a personal crisis of identity for him. And I think it is also why, in some respect, at the bigger political level, he is more resentful of Bobby Wine than probably Besigye. Besigye presents a different problem, but he does not present. He presents a power threat. He does not present a legitimacy problem the way Bobby Wine does. Yeah.
Talking of which, I wanted to just take a sort of different direction in this conversation and ask, where does that leave the opposition or alternative political institutions that have either been hollowed out or have constructed their whole reason for existence on the basis of ejecting Museveni or whatever the NRM politics are? So how do they relate? Can they even outlast him? I mean, would their relevance end? Because I just wanted to move the conversation into, does the political terrain have any other options where political expression or discussion of grievances of whatever nature can take place? Or are we now hostages of just horse trading and transactional political choices? Why are you all quiet?
My view is that no, listen to
As
me.
we are disciplined people, you must say we should speak. We don't just
Okay, Salam. Salam goes.
Well, my reading is that NRM is no longer responding to ideology and and propelling Uganda forward ideologically. It is more spending time building a political, military, financial response to opposition. How do they curtail opposition? How do they hold on to power? So opposition is a big factor in their political calculus. So you cannot discount the role of the opposition in framing and in determining the response. NRM is more reactionary now than having the political strength and leverage of pushing the politics beyond what it is today. And so it's very dangerous for you to discount the role of even the limited capacity to mobilize and organize in a professional manner. The the discontent is growing, and there's limited response to managing it. PDM, Emyoga have all not made sense because the issue is not economics per se, it is politics. And until we deal with the political question, the discomfort will continue to grow, the dysfunctionality will wear NRM down, will wear us all down, and we will all be victims, including the perpetrators of the system. And so
So,
it's very scary for them as well.
okay, Charles.
you know, there are three things, but position politics today exists in very different times. Particularly with social media, which have allowed all forms of expression and organizing. I think it's going to be very difficult to have the kind of thing you saw, you see in Tanzania, or but even Tanzania doesn't have it, these very huge kind of opposition movements, because energy is being dissipated all over the place. That's one. The second one is, I don't know that it's you who said, or Salam Musumba, said that. I think it was Salam, that the NRM is the only show in town, suggesting the opposition are not it. I think that, and you see this in Kenya, because one of the things which has happened with opposition politics is that actually sometimes it might be more profitable for you to be an opposition politician than a government one, because when you win as an opposition, you can sell your loyalties to the state, the dominant party, for a higher premium. So if and look around, some of them are my friends. I don't want to mention the people who really get a big payday. Are the people who cross from FDC and all these things to the NRM. So I think that's the probably a very uncomfortable part of our politics, but actually it pays, and the money from it comes from the fact that the government is so repressive that the opposition people who emerge are generally few. So it increases their price. If the government was a democracy, it would lower the cost of buying the opposition. But I don't think that they necessarily see it that way.
I think that actually the opposition guys in parliament, in this particular parliament, have commanded a much higher premium than the NRM guys when it came to carrying through legislation.
Oh
Because
yeah.
I know a couple of NRM guys I know who couldn't even put in a word for themselves for a much higher price. So they settled for what the chief whip had brought, while the other guys had gone to State House and negotiated directly and said, "This is our valuation of our political." But Daniel, on a more serious note, I turn to you. We've talked about all forms of transitions, but the one transition we have not talked about is the transition of the electorate. In other words, the generational transition, whereby I think about 56, if not 60% of the voters that will be on the roll will all be people who were born 2000 and after, and those are many more than the ones who are already eligible or born before 2000. How do those people shape the expectations and how elections and politics is conducted? So that's element number one. Element number two, how do you see the changes in technology and the changes in geopolitics around the world impacting on the way the politics goes?
Well, so I think to the first point in terms of the demographic, the way a government governs, I think determines the kind of opposition that it gets, and I think as the NRM has muddied the waters very intentionally to push the intelligentsia and anyone with anything close to reputation out of politics, it has then, inevitably created a vacuum where I guess the polite word is to say non-politicians have entered the political fray. So it's a bit of a good thing in the sense that people then have access to power. How you have a completely new set of political actors, but the quality does not necessarily improve with access to power. The quality of policy making, of decision making, or even just the quality of the individuals. So one of the things that kind of frustrates me is that all these discussions about whether it's transition or succession or the politics is happening in kind of a void without asking the question of what is the Uganda that we want? And therefore, what are the things we need to be thinking about, whether it's institutions, institutional culture, political players, etc., etc. So politics has become an end in and of itself, that you go in, you have your term in office, you amass as much as you can. If you're lucky, you get re-elected. Otherwise, you get out and run for the hills. And the wave of young people that came into politics, when NUP kind of created a wave at the last election and just before that, you're beginning to see the disgruntlement within those groups, because those who were sent in got in there and realized, A, they can't do anything to change the demographics, rather the politics, because they don't have the numbers. And two, it's actually a nice thing to replace the guys that you have been trying to remove, right? So one of two things I think is going to happen. The first is that, and I need to be very careful saying this, that if we're lucky, things are going to get worse quickly and then start getting better. And that's probably you're going to see maybe the emergence of groups that can articulate widespread grievances, whether it's about local participation in the economy. We're beginning to see, the likes of traders, etc., etc. Unfortunately, it could spill over into xenophobia, right? But then we need to get to a point where we are refocusing the politics to some bit of issue-based discussions, and with NLAC that's going to be economic. So all these young people who don't have, they can't get a greasy hand on the property ladder, they can't get employment, even if they have the qualifications, they can't raise capital to go into business. How do they articulate their grievances? They are more aware of the world. They have access to wealth of information. They are the numbers, and they have seen that just articulating to get people to go into parliament or contesting for parliamentary seats does not necessarily shape or change their lives. With any luck, there will be mobilization of that demographic, either into a mass movement that attempts to sweep out the older guard. Unfortunately, what we've seen so far is really a discussion on biology, young people trying to get rid of older people and not necessarily choosing from amongst themselves those that they think are best placed to represent and articulate them. So within ELAC, we will go from the noise to the real issues and then start having discussions on how do we create jobs, how do we create opportunity, how do we create a bit of equity. In terms of the tech and the geo, I think when the Arab Spring began, there was this whole sense that it was going to spread all over the continent. I think it was held back by the Sahara Desert, but
yeah, we have only rainy seasons and dry seasons.
but Kenya is interesting.
And I was going to ask Charles about that, so I'll come back to him. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, I'm going to hear what Charles says. So the access to internet and social media in Kenya is much higher than most countries of its size on the continent, including some countries that are actually bigger than Kenya. So there is an awareness among young people of both an awareness of what's going wrong due to the work that civil society has done in Kenya, but also an aspiration for something that's better. And that has been made possible, by just access to the internet. But tech has also allowed them to mobilize. And there's something uniquely Kenyan about the ability to, if you go back to Ushahidi, I think 2007, just trying to be able to use GIS to locate hotspots, and then you see the way they have been mobilizing themselves and creating communities that can use tech to aggregate, but also to identify, who's doing what. I think there's going to be a contagion that sparks off from that example. It may not come to Uganda directly, it may not come to Uganda in the short term, but the idea that young people in one country are not able to learn from others in another country where the underlying issues are the same, I think is something that is out of the window. If you're in intelligence, if you are kind of doing risk mapping for these countries, if you look at the demographics, if you look at the inequality, if you look at the things that are making young people unhappy, and not just in Kenya, if you look at the rise of the nationalist movements in Europe, in other places, it's just these disaffected young people who feel like they have been sold a pipe dream. I think they are going to drive political change, hopefully in the right direction, but without organization and an injection of issues, it's probably going to be a bit more chaotic.
Charles, I want to, before you come in, I want to hazard a thought that actually one of the drivers of the Gen Z public expression of their frustration was that the Kenyan political establishment was so busy horse trading power that they forgot the interests of the people from whom they draw the power. So, and then the other thing I wanted to throw on the table again, both you and Salam can deal with this one in particular, is that what happens when money runs out and we can't buy politics anymore? I mean, that's what happened to Bashir in Sudan, and now we know where the Sudan has ended. Mugabe in Zimbabwe couldn't buy people anymore. the Dos Santos in Angola had taken all the money. It became too costly to keep buying guys. He ran with it to Portugal. So what happens? What happens when you can't buy, when you run out of money? And it's a very big possibility we could run out of money, and you can't practice this type of politics anymore. But you've got this group of young people, as Daniel says, who've been sold a pipe dream. What do you do in those situations? In other words, that's the, I think it was Daniel who was talking about the imponderable that could come into play during the transition, because the transition we're discussing assumes that things will remain the way they are. But what if they don't? And the likely force that will drive them is disaffected young people.
Well, but first of all, to go to Kenya, there are some structural differences because you must when the displacement because Kenya was a settler colony. I mean, it was not to the extent that Zimbabwe or South Africa were, but there was a high level of displacement. So a lot of these people came to these massive slums, what became massive slums, or to the urban areas. So you had well before, there was even an proper African working class in Uganda. You had a lot of these very disaffected people who were a product of the displacement, and they just grew bigger, and so their politics is tends to be different. So we are only just beginning to see this process. But because of this economic thing, one of the things, you talked of geopolitics, perhaps we talk of geoeconomics, because what had then happened is that we've gone to this very crude export of labor abroad. But I think that what will happen to these young people who go abroad is what will happen to our grandfathers when they went to the wars in Burma and I don't know all those other places. That just think of what happened to them when they return, or even their children. So I think that you are going to see that actually driving politics more. But also, the other thing that has happened is that I see a lot of what I'll call recession, because the response of Ugandans, and there are many historical reasons for that, a lot of them has actually disengaged from this big national project. And I just see that we are going to see there a demand for a very, very different kind of state. It will have to be highly decentralized, if at all. But we might even see the end of Uganda as we know it, and it might actually be for the better. So in some of the political decisions that the political system is making, they are actually almost making this kind of recession scenarios inevitable. The Kenyans were able to kind of deal with it through devolution. And therefore, what happens when you look at some of the data, if you look at individual countries, if, individual counties, some of them, if there were counties, they would be years ahead of the Kenyan state as is now, in terms of how it is run and how they conceive of development. So that has introduced a certain thing which has kind of stopped the migration to the periphery by the younger people, and then now they are largely concentrated on kind of the big central issues which give rise to the Gen Z protests.
Right. So one last thing that I want to throw into the mix before we wind up and go to bed, because we've been here talking for so long, is what therefore then is available to the population. Because also sometimes those of us who engage in public debate, we discuss as if these people have no agency whatsoever. I mean, are there ways in which those who want a different approach, and those who think that there should be priorities about how the country should work for the majority, about how the politics should be organized, about enfranchisement. What are the ways in which these people can, in a sober and progressive manner, participate in public affairs if the rest of this process seems to be gone? And I'll start with you, Salam.
Well, we have limited choices because you are asking us to think normally in a very abnormal situation, a situation that calls for responses that are not yet written in the democracy book. What Charles was describing is a well-trodden political path that we don't need to beg what will happen, how will it end. It always ends the same way. It ends in chaos. And I don't think the people who are holding on to power are scared of chaos. Actually, they love chaos. They thrive best with chaos. So for as long as they hold the reins of power, chaos is not a deterrent. And so we will have to find other ways. And I like the way the peep into the future that Charles has done, that Uganda may not exist the way it has. And from my point of view, it will not do so again, because we cannot continue to be hostages, and we cannot continue to be displaced by the gun, displaced by migrant populations. And I think we have finally found who we are. And that self-discovery is the best outcome of all this oppression that we continue to suffer. So at the end of the day, if we can end it quick, the solutions for that are better than waiting for it to die and decay further.
You know, history has its own mind. So, yeah, go on.
So for me, I think building and rebuilding, repurposing ourselves to get a viable and competitive country is now a luxury, because we are preoccupied with survival. In whatever form we will survive, limping, crawling, or demented, survival is our first priority. And that's what is preoccupying political organizations. We are not at our best, but it's better than nothing.
So for Charles and Daniel, there is one element that I didn't bring out in the geopolitics, but I think I want to bring it out now. We must touch it before we go, is whether we like it or not, we exist in a particular context in the world. So two things arise. So first of all, you have a situation where now the US is completely uninterested in African client states anymore, and they're withdrawing and going away with their money. And then you've got the Europeans taking their money back because they need to build defense systems for themselves. We find ourselves in completely new territory where you cannot exercise patronage by allowing foreign governments to finance some aspects of your social services. So for instance, health or higher education, so the social services have been left to foreign governments, although we pretended it was part of our budget. What happens when actually this money dries up? And it's going to dry up, and the preferential treatments we used to get as geopolitical partners dry up. The second aspect is that right now, as a country, we are engaged in wars in Congo, in South Sudan, in Somalia. We're also providing protection in Equatorial Guinea. I don't know if we're still in Central African Republic. We are embroiled in the complications of the Sudan. Can we afford those adventures if the politics look as fragile as they are? Or how have other people who have been foreign adventures, how has that affected the local politics?
Bob, it's one of those, because it could go, either direction. Because it raises the question, what will the system do in crisis when these taps are run off? Because there are resources in the country to make up for that, but it would mean higher taxation and very
and the transparency.
Yes, and oh no, not necessarily. Well, that's the second alternative. It can that you could, as part of the new political bargain, you might say, okay, we need this money, so the only way we can get greater extraction for the public is to trade consent and transparency, so that you get more money. But it could also go in the opposite direction. Because you don't want to negotiate with them over things like that. You would then miraculously we get into a more democratic dispensation. But two, they could decide that no, this we will cede power if we do that. So let us extract without this a democratic bargain. So it would become more repressive. You would end up where Eritrea is. So it's really up in the air, and if we see one country which ran very quickly into these problems, although for different reasons, is Botswana, that other star country. So they have chosen, probably in their typical fashion, to go into a more democratic tradition. At the same time, Senegal, where this guy came, Bosore, in a very popular election and all that, faced with the same challenges, he is going in the opposite direction. So really, we just have to sit and wait and watch the sun set.
What a wait! How can we be so? There's no agency left, Daniel. What?
Well,
on the Trump effect?
I guess if you want to if you're feeling very happy, you should call up Charles for a conversation. Quickly put you out of your happy misery.
Well, he'll bring you back down. He'll bring you down to earth. That's for sure.
So I think that the Trump aid cuts, short-term pain, I think long-term gain. It's ridiculous that 9 out of 10 people in Uganda who are taking ARVs today are swallowing tablets bought by the US government. It's just criminal. And I think, and there's pain, to individuals, to institutions. But I think as long as we are dependent on the sustained and long-term kind of arms from other people, which are not buying us time to actually then bring up our own capacity to pay our own bills, I think it's a good thing. Let us, figure out that no one is coming to save us. It will, with some luck, allow us to become more efficient, to put money in the right places, and to, begin making the trade-offs that are necessary to make a balance between the elite and the governed. But in terms of the kind of the progression, the thing that worries me most is actually the oil revenues, because I think if you just imagine Uganda today without the promise of oil revenues, and then you look at the economic fundamentals, you look at the inequality, you look at the poverty, you look at the ninjas right in the middle.
What are the ninjas?
The young people with no income, no jobs, and no assets.
I didn't know.
Daniel, you've got to repeat that. What are the ninjas?
People with no income, no jobs, and no assets. So they have nothing, right? So if you just imagine a world where you do not have the promise of, $1 billion, give or take, coming into the treasury every year, right? You wouldn't take some of the loans we're taking. You wouldn't be as wasteful in terms of what you're borrowing for and how long it takes you to execute, right? And you would have the incentive to bring about some kind of reforms, right? The fact that those things are not happening suggests to me that there is a worldview that says, let's hold out long enough, get access to this money, and then make sure we're better armed, make sure we can pay off rivals. If that scenario comes into play, one, we don't have as much money from oil as we think we do, so we can't maintain a repressive society that actually delivers services, right? So you don't have the option that, away from what Charles was proposing, whether it's democracy or transparency, where you can actually do a hybrid, where you remain repressive, but you deliver people the goods that they want. So that's going off the table. And the incentive then for reform, whether it's economic reform, whether it's political reform, diminishes. So if there was a way, and, this is going to make me, get taken off very many Christmas invitation lists. And because we've been waiting for a very long time, if the oil were to be delayed for another 5-7 years, it might actually be good for Uganda, not bad for Uganda.
Wow. Okay, so guys, a very quick final word from you, and then we go off into the night. And I am hoping that we will probably be back next week, but that is yet to be seen. So we'll decide that. So Salam, starting with you very quickly. A last one.
Well, I'm glad to hear from Daniel, my brother, from Charles, and to be.
Both you and Daniel are going to dance twins.
Oh my God.
And for Charles, you're invited to the dancing of the twins, and you.
When is it?
Don't worry, I'll send the invitation. But really say that the pattern is very worrying. The restlessness is building, and we usually get it wrong all the time when we go into elections. We are not able to predict properly and rightly because our people are as unpredictable as they've always been. The narrative is being shifted as usual to say that all is said and done, but it's not done yet, because the pain in the countryside is palpable. So I'm hoping that you guys who are not in the thick of things are able to think through and advise the political actors so that we can we can reverse the worst that we all fear, and that we can be able to put this country back on the rails, at least to breathe until we are able to fix ourselves. But the time is also running out for us. We should be thinking about the next generation of the Onyango Boards and the Kalinachis. Time has really caught up with us as well.
Right.
But it's been a great pleasure being on this platform. Thank you.
Daniel, a quick one.
Really a pleasure, Honorable Salam. Salam is. I kind of argue that we lost something when people like Honorable Salam left Parliament. I think we would not be having such despondent discussions today. So it's a pleasure to listen to you, and obviously Charles, who we know where to melee. But let me just leave you with an interesting thing. In the '96 election, there were 276 parliamentary seats.
Yeah.
Guess how many candidates we had for those seats?
How many?
814. In 2021, we had, total number is kind of close at 500, but 353, right? Guess how many candidates we had?
How many?
3,415.
Okay. In
If you have more people running
I have a
for...
question for you. In 1996, how many candidates were there for president?
I think there were 3.
Charles, your last word. Leave Daniel and his statistics.
No, again, it is. I mean, it's been wonderful to catch up with Daniel. Peter, I don't catch him much in Nairobi. We usually have a ball, and Salam Musumba was very nice to her. She's, unofficially my sister-in-law. She has calls, friends in my house. I have to be very nice to her.
Say hello to them for me.
But Bob, I'm looking at this. There is this video that my good friend Duncan Abigaba posted yesterday, over and with it, just such a fine tongue in cheek. He calls it a hands-on prime minister, and it is Prime Minister Nabanja at this huge thing, serving luobo or food to people in, and
it represents service to the people. Service.
This is a summary of everything we have said in a video which is less than 1 minute.
Good night, all of you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.
Well,
Good night, guys.
And I hope we can return next week.
Okay, sure enough. Thanks.
All right. Bye, guys.